You remember a number of years ago, maybe quite a while back, but there was kind of a fad among certain Christian circles to wear a bracelet that had the initials WWJD. Everybody know what that means? What? What would Jesus do? And it was kind of a nice little kind of exercise intended to, in a good kind of godly spirit, to get a sense of asking oneself in one's daily living a very important question. And a very important question all disciples need to ask themselves. I remember at the time there were a number of people who kind of made fun of it a little bit and came out with their own things. And I'm going to try to remind myself of these. There was a T-shirt I remember that said, when someone asks you what would Jesus do, remind them that freaking out and flipping tables is viable. And then there was the bumper sticker that said, what would Jesus do? Remember, Jesus loved the tax collector. Just say. My favorite was a button that had the WWJD on it, and below it said, who wants jelly donuts? I want that one. But that is not an unimportant question, is it? What would Jesus do? I mean, that's the heart of our struggle as we try to understand, as we try to seek ways in which we are following in the footsteps of Jesus and walking in the way of Jesus. And that's not an unimportant question. Who here has, I'm going to see who's kind of cool and who's not. Who's here seen The Mandalorian? Oh, okay. Mandalorian's this show, kind of Star Wars themed show on Disney Channel Plus. Now, who here has heard of Baby Yoda? So just about everybody has seen the gif of that. And part of the reason I'm lifting up The Mandalorian is there's this line they say to each other, this group of people, they identify this society, this culture of people that has a certain understanding, a code of ethics and a code of how they should behave and how they should respond. And what they say to each other is a line that you may have seen on a T-shirt or on a GIF on your computer. Who can tell me what that line is? Does anybody know? This is the way. This is the way. And they say it to each other and keep going back and forth. And part of me loves that because did you know the early followers of Jesus were called people of the way? The way of Jesus, the way of the cross, a way of being in the world. And there's something meaningful about that. In fact, I would probably propose to you that almost every Sunday morning when you gather here, we're wrestling with that question of discipleship. What does it mean to be walking the way of Jesus? And what does that look like? And not surprising, knowing the church as it is, there's often disagreement about what that looks like. We have the Gospels, the early writings of the church, that are trying to describe what that discipleship is. What does it mean to walk the way of Jesus? And we have a lot of different ways described by a lot of different Christians. You have, how do we reconcile the way of Joel Osteen, a way of prosperity and wealth, as one aspect of the Christian faith, to the way of Teresa, St. Teresa, who said connection to the leper is the way of Jesus. I mean, we see debates within the church all the time about that way. Is the way of Jesus a welcoming one or one of condemnation? And we would say, an essential part of the way of Jesus this is the way is always a path of humility. In fact, humility is a key concept for understanding who Jesus was in the world. But it's really more complex than that, and in particular the story we read this morning from the Gospel of Luke. It's interesting how Jesus defines humility here, and he almost does in kind of a contradictory, conflicting way. Now, the Gospel of Luke is often referred to as the Gospel of Bread. And the reason is, Jesus, every time you turn around in the Gospel of Luke, if you're reading something, Jesus is sitting down at table with someone and breaking bread. Constantly. And the odd thing that Luke notices is that he's always doing it with the wrong kind of people. He's doing it with the tax collectors and the prostitutes. He's doing it with people who are ignored. And that's a big part of the theme of the Gospel of Luke, is who Jesus breaks bread with. In our text this morning, what's interesting is that Jesus is breaking bread with the leader of the Pharisees, who in the Gospels often is a code for an enemy of Jesus, right? The lawyers and the Pharisees, who Jesus always finds himself in conflict with. So there's this model that Jesus is giving us in which he's breaking bread. The way of Jesus is to break bread even with your enemy, right? Even with someone he profoundly disagrees with. There's something meaningful about that kind of humility. But then, what does Jesus do as he's breaking bread with these people who are in power, who are empowered? As he questions them not once, not twice, but 3 times. In other words, Jesus is humble enough to stay at table with them, but not so humble that he doesn't challenge them. He doesn't stay silent. He says, "Why don't you heal on the Sabbath? This person's in pain." What interpretation of religion says that you can't heal someone simply for liturgical religious reasons? Why would you believe that? And he says to these very wealthy and powerful people, he says, "Why are you always taking the seat of honor? Why are you always building yourself up and taking these spaces and places of being honored?" And then the third and probably the most decimating question he asks them, well, don't invite your friends, your brothers and sisters. Just don't invite them to come eat with you. Who are you supposed to invite? The poor, the crippled, the lame, and the blind. I don't know about y'all, but hearing those words makes me think, I don't know that I really want to know what Jesus would do. Because it challenges the very assumptions I have about how the world is supposed to work. There's this Methodist pastor in Washington, D.C., serves a Methodist church. And she has written a book in this particular time as churches struggle to say, who are we in this world? What are we supposed to be about? And she titled the book, Sacred Resistance. And she says, what the church is called to do is to resist anything in the world that is not of God, in the sense. To resist anything in this world that treats God's children as less than dignified, because that's who God was and Jesus was. That the call of the church is to embody this resistance to portraying the world in such a way that we lose this concept that God's love is big enough to embrace all kinds of people. And she says it's sacred because it comes not from some particular political point of view. It comes not from just feeling bad for other people. It comes not just from some ethical standard. Really, our resistance comes from the truth that God, in Jesus Christ, is at work in our hearts and in our community, and Jesus the Christ is humble enough and shows the way is that we identify with, we embrace the broken and the poor and the lame and the crippled and the blind. This is the way that we sit at table, especially with those we disagree with. This is the way that we don't stay silent. And this is the way that we go and we seek out and invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, and the blind. To God be the glory this day and forevermore. Amen.